This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. November 4th, 1922, 100 years ago, Howard Carter discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun, or better known as King Tut. It's been 100 years almost to the day. 100 years may seem like a long time, but King Tutankhamun era was 3,300 years ago. Every time there's a new pharaoh discovered, there's always new mysteries. And what has King Tut's discovery? Has it answered any questions or just raised more? Today we're going to have back with us the amazing psychic explorer and psychic lawyer, Mark Anthony, is going to be on the show. He's a fourth generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. And with his exploring and psychic abilities, we're going to dive into the tomb of King Tut. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the manyth time, the one and only Mark Anthony.
Thank you, Tony. I always enjoy being on Truth Be Told, so thank you for having me back.
Well, you know, you're one of my favorite guests because you always bring it. I mean, there's nothing I can't throw out at you that you kind of know something about. I'm like, what is this guy? What does he not know? Well, I'm excited because, you know, like I said in the intro, 100 years to the day that King Tut's tomb was discovered. How exciting is that? And
yeah, and it's such a great story. There's so many factors that go into it. It's got like certainly it's Indiana Jones meets Downton Abbey.
Right. Well, I have to tell you my story. So I don't remember a lot about it, but in the 1970s, I believe King Tut went on tour, you know, like the Beatles, and he went through Chicago. I think he stayed at the Waldorf or something like that. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But I remember when I was a kid, my family happened to go see some family members up there, and my dad got tickets to go see the King Tut's tomb at the Historical Museum up there. So I did get to see it in the 70s. And I think that's the last time I've ever got a chance to see it. So I did have an opportunity to see him live in concert. So I was excited and that we got to talk about him today. And for the people that really, I mean, they may have King Tut's tomb and, you know, conversation, but can you give us a little bit more information on who he was, when did he live, and who was he connected to back into the pharaohs of the ancient Egypt?
Tutankhamun is the most famous pharaoh, not because he was a great ruler that ruled for decades, but simply because his tomb in the Valley of the Kings was the only one, Tony, which was discovered that had not been plundered. So it was pretty much intact. And people in the United States and Europe, they tend to think of ancient Egyptian history as being the pyramids, and that somehow Tutankhamun was in the pyramids.
Right.
The pyramids were in the 4th dynasty. Tutankhamun was the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. To give you some perspective of how long Egyptian history runs, more time passed between the construction, or about the same amount of time passed between the construction of the Great Pyramid and the burial of Tutankhamun than between the birth of Jesus and the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus. So the pyramids are roughly 4,000 to 5,000 years old. So they were constructed sometime around 2500 BC. Now, of course, there's people that say that they're older, and particularly the Sphinx, and that's a whole nother discussion.
Right.
we can talk about that if you like, but since it's the 100th anniversary today of King Tut's discovery, so to give further perspective, think of Cleopatra. Everyone's heard Cleopatra.
Oh, for sure.
Well, Cleopatra came another 1,300 years after Tutankhamun. So, so Cleopatra died around, I think it was around 39 BC. So Tutankhamun was 1,300 years before that, and the pyramids were almost another 1,500 years before that. So Egyptian history is extremely long. Tutankhamun was not buried in the pyramids. He was buried in an area that is known as the Valley of the Kings. And the pyramids had all been raided and plundered. So by the time of Tutankhamun's dynasty, what the Egyptians were doing is they were building these extremely elaborate underground complexes with several rooms in them. And that's where they were placing their kings. And so Tutankhamun of the 18th dynasty, there you go, great graphic of the tomb. And you can see how they go down into the ground. And that is what was happening then, because the priesthood, and that's a good depiction, good photograph of Tutankhamun's tomb, which ironically is also the smallest.
Oh, really?
Tomb in the Valley of the Kings. He was a relatively minor king and essentially obscure.
So that's interesting that he's kind of one of the most famous ones, but yet he was such a minor pharaoh and even one of the smaller tombs. That's fascinating.
It appears that he became pharaoh when he was 9 years old, and then he died around anywhere between age 18 to age 20.
Right.
So the accepted age is that he was 19 years old when he died. And let's go back 100 years. And then we'll get into some more mysteries.
Yes, please.
So it is the early 20th century. Tombs had been discovered all over the Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists from all over the world, the Germans, the British, the French, the Americans, the Italians, they were all digging, and they found all these tombs. And in the records, a name Tutankhamun kept surfacing. So everyone was trying to find him. No one could. And there was a British archaeologist. His name was Howard Carter, and you brought him up in the introduction. Howard Carter, he was like he's such a quirky guy. He was a confirmed bachelor, which is very unusual back in the 1920s. And we don't know what his deal was. We don't know if it was women, if it was men, if it was, we don't know about Carter. What we do know is that he was most likely a genius. He was extremely rude and impatient. He couldn't stand what he considered to be stupid people. He hated the media. He hated being asked questions, what he called dumb questions, or considered to be dumb questions. The other thing about him is he was ruthlessly obsessive. And Carter met around 1900. He met a British aristocrat, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. And the Earl of Carnarvon, George Stanhope Molyneux, and who lived in Highclere Castle in England. Now, all of your viewers who watch BBC or Masterpiece Theater probably have all seen Downton Abbey. Mm-hmm. And Downton Abbey is filmed at Highclere Castle.
Oh, wow.
So every time we watch Downton Abbey and you see Highclere Castle, you see Downton Abbey, that's Highclere Castle. And all the interior scenes with the aristocrats are all filmed inside of Highclere. But the scenes with the servants, Tony, the ones downstairs, those were all filmed in a studio in London. Yeah, there's Highclere. And the reason that they're filmed, they were not filmed in the basement of Highclere, is because it is believed that the Carnarvon family's private Egyptian collection is stored there. In fact, the current Earl of Carnarvon, the 8th Earl of Carnarvon, is the great-great-grandson of the Earl of Carnarvon, who funded Howard Carter. So basically, Lord Carnarvon was an armchair archaeologist, and he used to winter in Egypt because he had a health condition and the dry climate helped him. So he meets Carter. They strike off a friendship. There's rumors about their friendship, but, whatever. And so Carter, though, had turned up nothing. And after 20 years of a very expensive expedition, Lord Carnarvon was about to cut funding. And Carter begged him, please, sir, one more season. And yeah, there is Howard Carter in the center, and that is Lord Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn, who many people believe was the role model for Lady Mary in Downton Abbey.
Oh, wow.
So
interesting.
So Carter wasn't the nicest guy. And he lived in this house that was a couple miles away from the Valley of the Kings, and he had an Egyptian staff. And the thing about Carter, he had no formal education. He went to Egypt as a teenager, and he was an artist, and he used to draw pictures of the tombs for archaeologists. He worked his way up. He learned to read hieroglyphs. He learned everything from in the field. And without a formal university education, he became one of the most famous archaeologists of the day because of his accuracy and his dedication. Well, he was at a bazaar and he bought this little canary, beautiful little yellow canary, and he kept it in a gilded golden cage. And his Egyptian staff realized that the canary used to calm him down. It would sing song, canaries, it would be chirping, right. And it kind of made Carter a little less miserable, and he didn't yell at the staff so much. And it was the morning of November 4th, 1922. As the sun was rising, Carter snaps awake, and the little canary, there she is, was singing to him. And so he got up and he went out to the Valley of the Kings to the dig. And this was no small operation. They had over 100 laborers. And when Carter arrived, nothing was happening. And that meant one of two things. Either somebody had been killed or they found something. So he approaches the workers, and the foreman runs up and said, Mr. Carter, we found something. So they take him to an area, and what's funny about this, Tony, it was the first area that he started digging in, but it was next to the tomb of Pharaoh Ramses VI, which was well known for its elaborate paintings. Right. And because it was interfering with tourism, he was asked not to excavate in that area. So 20 years after the fact, they find a step in the sand.
Oh, wow. That would have been cool.
Yeah. And then the workers feverishly, they start digging. They found another step, 16 steps going right down into the bowels of the earth. And then they come to a door, and they're clearing the door. And Carter's thinking, okay, this is good. Maybe this is a tomb. Maybe this is a cache, which would have been a storeroom because they found others. And if it is Tutankhamun's tomb, maybe, it's been plundered like all the rest. And then as they start dusting off the door, his heart almost stopped. On the great wooden doors, there was two handles, and there was a clay seal that had not been broken.
Oh, my God. He's I would be,
it bore the name Tutankhamun. Carter is almost about to have a heart attack because he realizes no other tomb in the Valley of the Kings had they ever found an intact seal. This means the tomb hasn't been opened. Meanwhile, back at his house, his Egyptian staff hears this terrible sound, and they run into the living room, and they're horrified when they see that a cobra had slithered into the canary's cage and was devouring the canary. The Egyptians couldn't believe it. The canary had become the mascot of the expedition, and they used to call the expedition the expedition of the golden bird. And the cobra was the symbol of the Egyptian pharaohs. So even though the staff was Muslim, they were still Egyptian, and they saw this as an evil omen that the spirits of the pharaohs were reaching out, and that ill favor would fall upon the expedition. This was right at the time that Carter discovers the tomb. So what he does is he immediately orders the tomb, the stairway refilled, and he puts armed guards on it, gets to Cairo, or Luxor, which is the city right near there, and sends a message to Lord Carnarvon that a great discovery had been made. 3 weeks later, November, I believe it was 26, 1922, Lord Carnarvon arrives with his daughter, Lady Evelyn. And they uncover the stairway, they break the seal very carefully, open the doors, and there's a hallway that's like 30 feet long, filled with debris. Takes the workers an entire day, and then they come to another door.
Oh my God.
And so Carter drills a hole in the upper left-hand corner of the door. And Tony, I'm going to read Carter's actual words.
Oh my God, please. I've never heard, I don't think I've heard it before, so let's hear what he says.
All right. So in his own words, Carter made a small hole in the upper left-hand corner of the doorway to insert a candle to test the air inside. And get this, the air that came out of the tomb smelled faintly of coconut oil and perfume. So they're like, wow. And the flame fluttered in the escaping hot air. Carter described what happened next. For the moment, an eternity it must have seemed to the others standing by, I was struck dumb with amazement, and when Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense any longer, inquired anxiously, "Can you see anything?" It was all I could do to get out the words, "Yes, wonderful things." So then Lord Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn start looking through the hole, and their jaws dropped. Everywhere they saw was the glimmer of gold. The room that they peered into was packed with chariots, statues, game boards, linens, jewelry, beds, couches, chairs, even a throne. And it was all in a state of disarray. Carter assembled the greatest team probably in archaeological history. They were the dream team. He got the best photographer from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, brought in experts from the British Museum, the Louvre, the Vatican Museum, and even though World War I had just ended, he brought German archaeologists. He had the dream team. It took 10 years, Tony, to take everything out of the tomb, because they meticulously numbered everything, photographed it, what position it was in. This is the first time the scientific method had actually been applied to archaeology or Egyptology, especially on a scale like this.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm going to ask about specifics of, like, the 16 steps and stuff like that. Sometimes back in ancient times, everything had a meaning. Was there a reasoning for 16 steps, or was that just coincidental? Was there anything on the doors itself that hieroglyphics? Because I think for me it would be very scary to touch something that I didn't want to destroy anything.
Well, along those lines, there was a couple. They opened up this one chest and it had clothing in it, and when they touched it, it disintegrated.
Yeah, see, that would,
And they were like, oh my God. And there was a pair of sandals that were covered with beads, and the beads collapsed. And they brought in these bead workers, and they
reassembled,
restrung them for the sandals. So, yeah, they certainly had issues. Now, with Tutankhamun's tomb, it answered a lot of questions. It gave us insight into a world that had been previously unknown. They could not believe the amount of treasure, the wealth, the obvious power of the 18th dynasty. But it also appeared that the tomb was a rush job. The paintings were of inferior quality. There was a lot of things that just didn't add up. And I like your question about the 16 steps. I've researched that. I would tend to agree if it had been a different pharaoh, but not this one.
Not this one.
Because it was such a rush to, unless maybe he was 16 years old. But I think with the steps, it may have just been a matter of practicality to get down to the level that they wanted to before they would dig the hallway. And one of the most disturbing finds in the tomb were 2 mummified fetuses. And the archaeologists could not understand what that was. Was it part of some macabre human sacrificial ritual, some symbol of eternity? Well, in recent years, DNA tests on the fetuses indicate that they were direct relatives of Tutankhamun, that he may have been their father, and they appear to have been twins and both female. So there were, I think, 7 chambers. There was what they called the treasury, the annex. But when they got to the crypt, and there was an elaborate series of walls that were wooden walls, gilded in gold. They took them apart. They found this enormous pink granite sarcophagus. So it was cracked in the middle, so they had to develop this really elaborate system of winches to get it off. And then they see inside an anthropoid coffin, which means a human-shaped coffin. And it was wood, but it was gilded with, some gold leaf on it. But they couldn't understand why it was so heavy. And this was another great mystery. There you go. Yes, that was the pink sarcophagus. And they took the top off, and inside were the 3 human-shaped coffins. So the first coffin, they opened it, and then there was another human-shaped coffin in it, also gilded in gold. And then the third coffin was solid gold. And there it is in front of us, 250 pounds.
Oh, my God.
Of gold. Yeah, I figured it out. In today's dollar, the weight of the gold alone would be almost $6 million. But given the fact that, it's kind of a one-of-a-kind
maybe a double.
Well, and then when they take the lid off that, they couldn't believe when they found the mummy, and there is the gold death mask on Tutankhamun, which you probably have a picture of.
Let's see. Gold.
Which is one of the, if not the most recognizable symbol of ancient Egypt.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now. Oh, yeah. Most people would say, oh, yeah, that's Tutankhamun right there.
There it is. Yeah, and the thing is, that fit like a helmet. See, there's a front and a back to that, and it fit like a helmet over the mummy. And then when they took that off, the mummy was essentially glued to the inside of the golden coffin, because what the high priests and embalmers did, they would pour all these what they called unguents, which were aromatic myrrh and some frankincense and some other oils on there. Well, over 3,000 years, it solidified. And they had to section the mummy. I mean, it's terrible what they had to do to the mummy to get it out of there. But on the mummy itself, they found 100, and I believe it's 121 pieces of jewelry. All in all, over 5,500 items were removed from Tutankhamun's tomb. And get this, Tony, it was the smallest of the pharaoh's tombs. And other archaeologists said, if they had found intact a tomb of like Ramses the Great or Amenhotep the third, which would have been Tutankhamun's grandfather, there would have been more treasure in a hallway of one of those tombs than there would in Tutankhamun's. I mean, those tombs were like 10,000 square feet. Tutankhamun's, was really small. But then more questions started to arise. The Egyptians believed the heart to be the most important organ in the body. They believed that that's where not only your feelings came from, but your memories. So the heart was always removed, specially mummified, wrapped up, and returned to the body. There was no heart in Tutankhamun's.
None at all.
Yeah. Then they noticed there were 120 different walking sticks in the tomb, and they all had been used. They all had dings on them. More recent analysis indicates that Tutankhamun suffered from, had clubfoot. Hold on, I want to get the exact diagnosis here. Okay, they found the walking sticks. He suffered from painful orthopedic conditions. He had evidence of Kohler's disease, which is an avascular bone necrosis, which causes poor blood supply in the bones of children. Also, it looks like he had traces of sickle cell anemia, malaria, and he had a clubfoot. So this kid was severely disabled, had an incredibly painful orthopedic condition. He was a physical wreck. Now, this was ancient Egypt. Pharaoh was supposed to be, like when we see the Ten Commandments,
right.
You see Yule Runner, etc. Well, that's what they wanted for a pharaoh. What they didn't want was a severely disabled kid with a club foot who could not lead troops into battle. So, and I don't think there was a whole lot of sympathy for the army for a disabled king. So when Tutankhamun's tomb, a massive amount of questions were answered, but even more started to arise. Why was there no heart in his body? Why was the mummy in such bad condition? In other words, the body, not necessarily the mummy. It looks like he may have died in some type of accident. But was it an accident? And that's part of the speculation.
Well, we'll get into that. But what you said about the fetus, and then DNA brought
two fetuses
together, it almost makes me feel like they killed the fetuses because they didn't want an offspring. At least to rule. Did he have any children that end up ruling, or did it? Because that's interesting.
You asked that. He was married to his half sister. Her name was Ankhesenamun.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where it gets really juicy, Tony. Okay, so Tutankhamun dies. He's buried, and Ankhesenamun, his wife, is left. Now, in what is now the country of Turkey, at that time, was the center of what was known as the Hittite Empire. And we've heard about the Hittites throughout history. Also, later in the Bible, during the story of David, there's Uriah the Hittite. So the Hittites were known for being great warriors, and at the time they had a great empire. And about a century ago, the Hittite capital of Hattusis was being excavated, and archaeologists discovered their Hall of Records, basically the Hittite version of the Library of Congress. They found 2 letters from Tutankhamun's widow to the king of the Hittites. And the letters basically said, "My husband is dead. I have no son. I will not be forced to marry a servant. Send me one of your sons that he may become king of Egypt."
Wow.
And so they have this letter. They also have recorded the king's reply, which is basically, "Well, I don't know if I should believe you." She sends another letter very similar to that. It appears that the Hittite king sent one of his sons. He never made it. Now, why? But we do know that it appears that he was murdered en route to Egypt, and then Egypt and the Hittite kingdom plunged into a 20-year war. All right, the plot thickens here. So, why is this going on? And then, after the Hittite prince disappears, Ankhesenamun marries the Grand Vizier, basically the Prime Minister of Egypt, who was old enough to be her grandfather. And his name was A-Y, a servant. She did not want to be forced to marry a servant. And this had never happened in Egyptian history before. Never had the Grand Vizier married a queen of Egypt to become pharaoh. Yeah, and there's a depiction, I believe, of Ai, and Ai is painted in Tutankhamun's tomb as performing what they called the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was a spiritual thing to let the spirit from the body out so that it could achieve immortality. Well, here's the thing, Tony. Ankhesenamun disappears from history after that. Ai rules as pharaoh for a couple years because he was an old man, and when he died, and his tomb was found, and it's extremely elaborate, lots of very fancy paintings, much superior quality to Tutankhamun's. There's no mention of Ankhesenamun in his tomb. His other wives are all documented, but she completely disappears. In fact, Tutankhamun's family disappears entirely without a trace.
That's what I figured. It sounds like that he didn't want any offspring or anything while he was alive, and then after he was alive, or after he died.
There's a theory.
Oh, tell me theories. We love theories.
Well, we got to look at Tutankhamun's father. Tutankhamun's father, all right, let's go to his grandfather. His grandfather was Amenhotep III, and he was the Yulbrenner, etc., pharaoh, so let it be written, so let it be done.
Right.
Amenhotep III, Egypt was essentially a superpower. Their empire stretched from what would be Libya in the west down to the border of Sudan in the south, up to Syria in Asia. Egypt was unmistakably a superpower. Well, when Amenhotep III dies, his son Amenhotep IV becomes pharaoh, changes his name to Akhenaten. And Akhenaten means the joy of the sun. Akhenaten is considered the world's first monotheist, the first person to believe in one God, the first king to believe in one God.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just God, it was a particular aspect of the sun. And in so doing, he moved the capital of Egypt from they had two capitals, Memphis and Thebes. He built his own city, Amarna, and this was going to be the center of his sun worship, sun cult. And in so doing, he cut the funding from the Egyptian priesthood. Now, the Egyptian priests were the scribes. Yeah, they ran the government. They ran everything. He cut the funding, and they hated him. The military hated him because allegedly he was a pacifist, and he would not go to war against the Hittites. And for the better part of 20 years, there he is, Akhenaten ruled Egypt as this sun-worshipping, perhaps fanatic, or was he somehow enlightened? Now, this theory has essentially been debunked, or rather criticized, but I still keep an open mind to this. We all know from the story of Exodus, and we're joking about the movie The Ten Commandments with Yul Brynner and all that, but we all know that in the Bible, there's the story of Moses and the plagues upon Egypt and the wicked Pharaoh who would not let the Hebrews leave Egypt. Well, if you believe that there was a wicked Pharaoh of Egypt, you also have to believe then, according to Scripture, that there was a good Pharaoh. The Pharaoh, hundreds of years before, who let the Hebrews into Egypt. And it was the prophet Joseph who his brothers betrayed him and sold him into slavery in Egypt, but he had the gift of divination. It's interesting how so many people say that mediums are not of God and divination.
Right.
But yeah, and one of the biggies is the prophet Joseph, one of the big figures in the Bible, and he's brought before the Pharaoh who was having disturbing dreams that there were 7 fat cows coming out of the Nile River only to be devoured by 7 skinny cows, 7 plump ears of corn only to be devoured by 7 skinny ears of corn. Reoccurring dream. Pharaoh's magicians, Pharaoh's astrologers, nobody could figure this out. And Joseph says, according to the Bible, there will be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. So then the good Pharaoh elevates Joseph to Grand Vizier status and to manage saving food to get Egypt through the famine. Is it possible that the Hebrews who believed in one God, Yahweh, is it possible that Joseph could have had some form of influence on a young Egyptian pharaoh who in turn may have taken monotheism and blended it with his own Egyptian beliefs? Now, this is purely speculation, but it certainly makes for great conversation on Truth Be Told, doesn't it?
Right. And, it sounds like, during, before he was even born, and then, he had a lot of mysteries and a lot of conspiracies and rumors that before he was born and even after his death. But then once Mr. Carter discovers and the canary gets eaten, there was a lot of considered curses around the tomb or the finding of it and some of the people that were involved. Can you talk about that? Because
sure. All right, let me finish with Akhenaten.
Yeah, please.
All right, so there's a mystery pharaoh, we think, between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, Smenkhare, who could have been Akhenaten's wife, the beautiful Nefertiti, or could have been perhaps a brother, but there's a transitional figure. And then 9-year-old Tutankhamun ends up on the throne of Egypt and immediately restores the ancient religion. Right, like a 9-year-old.
I was going to say a 9-year-old, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So basically, once Akhenaten's dead, now the high priest, the Grand Vizier the military is back in charge. They're manipulating this kid, but they also see that he's severely disabled, and they were looking for the right opportunity to get rid of him, his whole family, put I in charge, and then when I died, General Horemheb seized power as pharaoh. So old behavior patterns die hard. Now, let's fast forward 33 centuries to the 1922 discovery. So Lord Carnarvon comes to Egypt. This is now the biggest news story in the world. Every press outlet is there. Carter hates the media, can't stand the fact that they've taken the name Tutankhamun and are calling him King Tut in the news. But Lord Carnarvon, very savvy, a British aristocrat, loves being the center of attention, basically says, Carter, you handle the excavation, I will handle the media.
Of course.
And he liked posing for the media and pictures and telling stories. Yeah, there you go. Well, the problem is Lord Carnarvon then sold the exclusive rights of the story about the tomb to the London Times. And as soon as he did that, every media in the outlet in the world was cut out of direct access. The reporters were furious, and they were looking for an angle. Well, meanwhile, the story of the cobra swallowing the canary, the symbol of the Egyptian pharaohs devouring the mascot of the expedition, had permeated the camp. So there's rumors of evil omens going around. And an unscrupulous photographer, fake news in the 1920s, said, he put out a story that within the tomb, a clay tablet was discovered, which written in hieroglyphs said, "Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh." So now the media's got a curse, they got the cobra, and then it becomes 1923, and it's April 1923, and Lord Carnarvon is not feeling well, and he's in a hotel in Cairo. A mosquito bite on his face got infected, and then he drops dead. And when he died, Tony, it was reported at the moment of his death, all the lights in Cairo blinked and went out momentarily. So now the reporters really have their curse, but it didn't stop there. More and more people who entered the tomb started dying. And what happened is, and I want to get the I want to get the right chronology here for your listeners. Okay. Everybody who was anybody started coming to this tomb. But the thing is, and this is documented by Time magazine, American tycoon George Day Gould, British industrialist Joe Wolfe, British aristocrats Mervyn Herbert and Richard Bethel all went to the tomb and then died right after they left it. And by within a few years, almost 30 people connected with the tomb had died. And Lord Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, was so horrified. He wrote in a suicide note, "I can't take any more of the horrors." And he jumped to his death from a building. And then during his funeral procession, the funeral carriage ran over and killed an 8-year-old boy. Well, now the media had their angle. People were dying. Stories of the curse were flying. And so this is how the curse of King Tut's tomb started spreading throughout the world. Meanwhile, talkies have come. And now Universal Studios starts making horror movies, and they cast Boris Karloff in The Mummy. And so King Tut's tomb changed the world, because if you look at the Art Deco movement of the 1920s, it has a very Egyptian look to it. So then you start getting tales of curses, tales of hyperactive mummies coming back and murdering people. So all of these things started going on. But you'd think that the evil spirits would have had it out for Howard Carter. And it gets even better, too, because even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, and who Sir Arthur and his wife, Lady Doyle, were both psychic mediums. They were very involved in the spiritualist movement. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle even said to the media, "Well, I think that the priests of ancient Egypt conjured elementals, evil spirits to strike down people." Then other rumors circulated that the Egyptians coated everything in the tomb with long-acting spores and toxic chemicals. One conspiracy theorist even said that the Egyptians put radioactive uranium all over everything.
I just love this stuff because, I mean, I have to say there are probably some truth to some of this. I mean, it's fun, for people like us to, the theories and the curses and stuff, but sometimes the coincidence is just, it's too good to be true. I mean,
it really is. But we also have to realize this was Egypt in the 1920s,
right? And
it's not like typhoid, malaria, yellow fever, all sorts of diseases, and antibiotics.
We didn't have all that back then.
Medicinal use didn't come into play until a good 10, 12 years after the tomb was opened. People got sick and dropped dead. I mean, in the United States, the average lifespan in 1900 was 45 years old.
Well, I beat that.
Yeah, so now go to Egypt without any vaccinations.
I'm sure it was even lower.
And drink the water, get bitten by mosquitoes, and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of people that, that was present at the opening of the tomb, but after all these people died and now it's 100 years later, has there been any reports of people that worked with the mummy itself of King Tutankhamun, or any of his artifacts that have had experiences from visions to a ghostly presence, or even also curses of death since then? Or is that just more kind of now like, it's just natural causes?
Not that I'm aware of, although I was in very close proximity at a Tutankhamun exhibit. It was cool because it was something I did with my dad a couple years before he passed. And we were looking at a number of the artifacts, and my dad was like a Mr. Fix-It guy, and he was looking at some of the chairs Tutankhamun had and how they put dowels in them. It was pretty sophisticated stuff.
Right.
But there was a crown that Tutankhamun wore. It was like the day-to-day crown. It was this sort of a bronze crown. And, of course, it was in glass, but I was close to it, and I got this feeling from it, Tony.
I was going to say, as a psychic, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a psychic. And this profound sense of sadness just enveloped me. And I realize hundreds, if not thousands, of people have handled these objects. So I don't think I was necessarily picking up on Tutankhamun's vibration, but I was feeling a connection, and I felt a very human connection, that this was not just an artifact, but this was something that belonged to at one time, a living, breathing person who had feelings and who had a very, very sad life. I mean, yeah, he was Pharaoh and all that, but this poor kid was a byproduct of generations of inbreeding, had all these genetic defects, and then on top of it had malaria. And then was he murdered, or did he fall off a chariot? Something happened. You'd think, though, that the evil spirits really would have had it out for Howard Carter. I mean, there was one person that they really needed to get, but they didn't. And he died peacefully in England in 1939. And even though he hated interviews, he gave this one interview when they asked about the curse. And this was exactly what he said. Tommy rot. The sentiment of the Egyptologist is not one of fear, but of respect and awe, entirely opposed to foolish superstitions. But, Tony, I think the curse did in a way get him, because Carter, who hated media attention, was catapulted to becoming the most famous archaeologist in the world. But even though he was offered speaking positions all over, he was snubbed by British academia because he didn't have university credentials.
Oh, excuse me.
And he also suffered from severe depression bouts. And I've often wondered if Carter may have been, he certainly was OCD, he could possibly have been bipolar. And I'm not crashing on bipolar people.
Right.
Carter was certainly obsessive, to the tune of 20 years nonstop looking for this until he did. He succeeded where dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands of people over the centuries had failed. And it's because of his perseverance and his relentless desire to seek the truth. So maybe the curse affected him, yet in another way, it required exactly that type of personality to make a discovery on this level.
After this discovery of King Tutankhamun, did he continue to look for other, or did he retire after that?
He was obsessed with finding the tomb of Alexander the Great, which is believed to have been in Alexandria, which Alexander the Great founded. And he really wanted to do that, but he eventually died peacefully in England in 1939, just before World War II started.
Right.
But can I go? Do we have time for another
please.
story?
I'm curious now. You got me interested.
All right. So now it's 1939 in England, and a French archaeologist by the name of Pierre Montet is excavating a city, an ancient Egyptian city known as Tanis. All right. I know you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, Tony.
Oh,
I know you have.
100 times.
Seen it. It's probably my favorite movie next to The Godfather.
Right.
All right. And there's a scene where they say the Nazis have found Tanis, and it's possibly one of the resting sites of the Lost Ark of the Covenant. So Pierre Montet is excavating a tomb of Susens II, and he finds it. And here's the thing. Not only does he find that it's intact, but he finds not one, not two, but three pharaohs buried in this tomb, Susan's Sheshonq and Susan's son, and Susan's coffin is solid silver with the head of a falcon on it. And get this, Sheshonq is mentioned in the Bible and in Raiders of the Lost Ark as the pharaoh who invaded Egypt and carried off the lost Ark of the Covenant.
Ooh.
So Pierre Montet found a pharaoh's tomb that was mentioned in Scripture itself. But
That's
why,
pretty cool.
Tony? Why haven't we heard of this incredible discovery? Another 3 pharaohs' tombs found completely intact with their treasures. Because it was 1939 and World War II was starting and none of the media was covering it. And so the Germans invade Poland, all hell breaks loose. And I understand that Pierre Montet was what once George Lucas was writing Raiders of the Lost Ark, he based Indiana Jones's nemesis, Rene Belloc, on Pierre Montet. So, yeah, there you go. And so for anyone who goes to the brand new Cairo Museum where they have the Tutankhamun exhibit, as you're rushing on your way to look at the treasures of Tutankhamun, stop and look at the treasures of Susans and Sheshonq, and you'll see solid gold coffins. And those mummies also have a gold death mask, just like Tutankhamun did.
Wow. What a connection.
Isn't that cool?
That is pretty cool. Yeah, that's weird. I guess that makes sense to you because of the war did start, and so you didn't really get to
I know. And I found out that Professor Montet died in the 1980s. And if I would have known that, I would have been basically a kid then, but I've always been interested. I would have written him a letter or something.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said at the beginning, you always bring it, and you brought it today to help us celebrate the 100th anniversary of King Tut, or King Tutankhamun. It's an anniversary of the discovery of his tomb, and I loved every minute of it. I love to sit. You're a great storyteller, so I love just sit back and just listen to your years of research, and you can tell your passion for this stuff because a lot of people talk about it like they just read it in somebody else's book, but you not only read it, you go and research and travel, and like you said, the explorer that you are. So thank you for bringing all this to the table.
Well, I love this stuff because history is not taught properly. I mean, every now and then you'll come across a history professor that really loves it.
Right.
But people need to realize it's not just a series of dates and battles. These are people. It's a story about people. Tutankhamun was a real person, and he was probably terrified most of his life, surrounded by high priests and generals who loathed his very existence and eventually eliminated him and his entire family. And so there's a murder mystery, there's royal intrigue and treachery. I mean, this is interesting stuff. And but also we are connected to these people because when you start looking at a frightened boy who had nowhere to turn, I think it's really hard for our hearts not to go out to Tutankhamun. So, and I'd like to leave it with this. If Tutankhamun was murdered, the most likely suspects were the Grand Vizier, and his accomplice, Horemheb, the general of the armies, and both of them became pharaoh. But here's the thing. For an Egyptian to achieve immortality, according to their belief system, you have to have their names remembered. That's why pharaohs like Akhenaten, the priesthood scratched his name, had his images and name removed from all monuments because they wanted to prevent him from ever achieving immortality. But who knows the names Who knows the names Horemheb? Some professors, people that read books like that. But the name Tutankhamun lives on in immortality. So in a way, justice has been done.
Oh, I love that, and that's a great way to end the interview. And please, as always, come back for, I don't even know how many times you've been on my show over the years, but one of these days, I hope you get back out here so you can come in studio and you can see my bedroom in the back. You know, that's it. No, I'm just kidding. For the people that are listening, I have a green screen with the tomb inside the tomb of King Tutankhamun. And but thank you so much. And anything coming up or new books coming out? Because it seems like you're always writing a brand new book.
Yeah, well, my book, The Afterlife Frequency, is the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness will change your life. And this is the ideal gift for anyone that you know who is facing the holidays with the loss of a loved one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very honored at how well the Afterlife Frequency has been received.
Oh, that's
it's been
great.
endorsed by the world's top near-death experience and afterlife research scientists. Movie star, film icon Shirley MacLaine has recommended it, and it just won first place in the Cover Coalition of Visionary Resources 2022 awards, and it was up for a Pulitzer Prize.
Oh my God!
So,
congratulations!
Yeah, so I'm very honored, very humbled, and if you like the way I tell stories, then you're going to like the Afterlife Frequency. I promise I'm not going to bore you.
Well, I was going to say, if you write, and now you do because I've read before, but he writes like he tells a story verbally. So you'll definitely be entertained and also just enthralled in the pages. So well, thank you so much, and thank you again for being part of Truth Be Told again. And please, everybody out there, go to afterlifefrequency.com. You can pick up books, I'm sure, on Amazon and the website and other places that sell books. And like I said, thank you again. And tune in every Friday for Truth Be Told with me, and then Bonnie Burkert. She does Wednesdays now that I think you guys would really enjoy being a part of her show. It's called Truth Be Told Transformation. We now have a new show, kind of a sister show of Truth Be Told. It's called Paranormal Pals, and it's my 4 interns, and they're all into this wonderful genre of ours, of the paranormal, and they talk about their experiences. And then, of course, Robert Hensley is going to be back very soon. Please go to parapodfestival.com. I am starting a brand new festival here in Santa Clarita, California. It's going to be April 1st, 2023. It's a Parapod Film Festival, Podcast Award, and it's a conference. We have some amazing speakers going to happen that day. We're going to have stargazing and ritual circles, and then, of course, UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, pretty much anything you can think of in the paranormal world. So, but thank you guys so much for being a part of Truth Be Told all these years. But until next time, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Take care. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.